Over to Senator Canavan.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to start by reflecting on the evidence we heard in Brisbane at a Senate inquiry of this committee into aircraft noise. I'm sure many of you, some of you, followed or have seen that evidence. Suffice to say, Air Services Australia came in for a bit of a beating that day. Pretty much all groups, one of the only things that all groups agreed on was that the planning, the implementation of the second runway by Air Services Australia had been severely lacking. Can I ask you to reflect on that evidence, and has or was, in your view, Mr Harfield or others, the performance of Air Services Australia lacking in regards to planning for the second runway for the Brisbane Airport?
Senator, before I ask Mr Curran to sort of add some further, because he's a bit more close to it than I have in the sense of the committee, the hearing, we have been on the record, and also with the Noise Ombudsman review, there were areas that in the period of time in doing the consultation as a result of and the flight path design with the new Brisbane runway, there were mistakes made, and for multiple different reasons, the length of time, plus also lack of documentation and a range of issues, and fully acceptive of all of that. That is one of the reasons why that when the post-implementation review came, that we engaged Tracks International to come in and provide an independent review of all the work that was being done so that we could actually continue to improve. Some of the accusations and things that are levelled against Air Services I don't accept, in the sense of is that we do not build the runway, we do not attract the aircraft, and the fact is that we have to manage the demand on the airport. So there is a sort of a range of things, except absolutely criticism that our performance wasn't as great. However, not all of those I'm willing to accept, but I'll ask Mr Curran to...
Thank you. Senator, yes, I certainly listened to, I would say, the vast majority of the testimony in Brisbane and have read the submissions, nearly all of them, I think, in detail. I've certainly gone over all of the submissions that have been made to date. Air Services has learned an incredible amount through the Brisbane parallel runway implementation. Mr Harfield's touched on some of them, I think, building on that a little bit. We certainly invest significantly more in community engagement now than we did a number of years ago, bearing in mind that process started in 2007 and the runway didn't go live until July 2020. But certainly we've taken the view, one of the key learnings is to work with airports far more closely throughout the whole life of these significant programs. To ensure that the community engagement meets the standard to which we will be held to account for. The Aircraft Noise Ombudsman holds us to a standard. The airports and other stakeholders beyond defence are not within the remit of the Aircraft Noise Ombudsman, and so we're very clear around the standard that we're held to and that we should be held to, and so we seek to work with airports to ensure that we will get to that standard. We've taken an incredible amount of learnings out of that to apply to other environments, Western Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and the like, in the way that we design flight paths, the way that we engage communities, and things like the community engagement standard that we now commit to and engage communities on the basis of that are some good examples of the learnings we've taken.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and thanks for the admission. I mean, I suppose my biggest concern after the day, though, was not the lack of consultation, notwithstanding it's a very important issue too, but it's just basic things haven't been done that seem to have been or should have been in your remit. For example, there was evidence that that the runways, the evidence provided to us was that the runways are still not operating in what was described to us as in an independent way. That apparently the two runways, and correct me if any of this is wrong, I'm going on what was told to me, but the runways were built to be far enough apart such that, particularly I think during this SODROPS stuff, they could be run independently. But apparently it's not the case. Apparently, due to the fact there hasn't been an updates to flight paths or instrumentation or regulations or something, I don't know. Apparently that's not possible. And I was just checking. This is evidence provided to us by Brisbane Airport Corporation. It wasn't from local constituents or some such. These are presumably people who know what they're talking about, and they're complaining that thanks to delays on your end, they actually can't run. The 2 airstrips they've built, spent a lot of money building, they can't run them independently as designed.
Senator, it is correct that as at today, the independent mode of operation is not available at Brisbane. For context on why that is the case, firstly, the independent runway mode is our most high capacity mode. It can deliver around 72 flights per hour. Today we're operating at a level less than that, probably closer to 50. The demand at Brisbane is also not at and nowhere near 72 flights per hour. So the introduction of the independent mode will allow for significantly more flights over Brisbane City, and so it is not a noise sharing mode, it is a capacity throughput mode. That's not been introduced primarily because of the length of the program. When the independent mode was designed, was somewhere between 2007 and 2018, CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, updated standards in relation to independent operations to reflect international practice, and that meant the design that we had earlier done was no longer valid. We're going through the process of actually looking to implement that mode.
Sorry, when was CASA? When was that CASA?
I haven't got the exact date here as to when it happened. It was prior to the, I beg your pardon, it was following the final design. The note I have here is due to a change to a CASA mandated procedure following final design. I think final design occurred in about 2018.
It was a long time ago. Yep, okay.
So there is a requirement to update that design, and the intention is to do that in the course of late next year. Again, we don't assess, and I believe nor does Brisbane Airport assess, that the forecasts for traffic demand will reach anything like 72 per hour in the course of next year.
There's a lot more questions from your evidence, but okay, let's start with that one. You claim that this independent operation only impacts capacity. I'll just read you some of the transcript from Brisbane. I asked Mr Boyle from the Brisbane Airports Corporation, can you just pinpoint what they have done, what have Air Services Australia done or not done that hasn't allowed SODROPS to increase? Big topic of the hearing, you might have seen, was the fact that despite promises made before the second runway, the share of flights operating over the bay had not increased. In fact, it basically stayed the same. Mr Boyle said that the airspace is designed to operate in a variety of different modes. I'll talk about 2 key areas. One is that the runways can operate dependent, so you have to consider aircraft on the other one, or they can operate independently. The system is designed to be operated independently. At this stage, we have not moved to independent operations, which allows for much better noise outcomes for the community, because Air Services Australia has not implemented that. I mean, are you disagreeing with Mr Boyle then, that you're saying that independent operations has nothing to do whether SODROPS can occur or not?
Could you say that again? Nothing to do with SODROPS?
SODROPS occurring or being able to be run on?
Senator, SODROPS is quite a different piece, and I'm familiar with Mr Boyle's evidence. I don't believe he mentioned SODROPS in that context. The two
I just read it out. That was a direct... I asked him directly, what has Air Services Australia done or not done that hasn't allowed SODROPS to increase? And he said, first thing he said was what I just read out, that they can't operate the runways independently. Sorry,
Senator. The independent operations is a high capacity mode where we are operating either both runways in a northerly direction or both runways in a southerly direction. SODROPS is a procedure, as I think we've mentioned previously, where we operate over the bay, Senator. There are a range of improvements that we are making and need to continue to make as it relates to SODROPS. I fully agree with the evidence of BAC in that regard, but we do not see the high capacity mode of independent parallel runway operations as a noise sharing mode.
Well, that's completely different from what Brisbane Airport Corporation is saying, and I can't just try to explain to me in layman's terms, because it's very hard for us, obviously,
Senator,
why is Mr Ball wrong? And your evidence clearly is that he's wrong. Why is he wrong?
Senator, the best explanation I can offer you is that independent operations, independent parallel operations, are a mode, in general terms, where we will be doing arrivals either to the north or arrivals to the south to both parallel runways simultaneously. And the aircraft, the runways, as you said before, are far enough space that we can run them almost like they're two separate airports from an air traffic control perspective. We can have the flights side by side, if you will, and that's safe to do so. Today, that mode is not available. That is a high-capacity mode. What we run today is a dependent mode of operations, which means we need to...
Which means we need to see...
Obviously, he's blaming you for not being able to run the
one at a time.
Obviously, when you run the sod drops mode and you're running, my understanding is that in that case, aircraft would be taking off and landing over Moreton Bay. My understanding is that because they're doing that effectively over the same airspace, that sod drops can only be turned on at times of relative low capacity. Is that right?
Senator, that's correct.
Okay. So if you had two separate runways, wouldn't you be able to turn on sod drops at a higher capacity level?
Senator, the sod props procedure is not related to the independent parallel runway operations.
No, that's not what I asked. That's just reasserting what you just said earlier. Explain to me why, if we had two separate runways that run independently, we could then do this sod drops at a high capacity level than what we currently do.
Senator, we can't because...
What's stopping you?
Senator, the capacity...
Answer the question. All right, we'll come back.
The capacity limitation on sod prop, Senator, is that we have an aircraft arriving onto one runway at the same time as we have it departing off the other runway. That is the complexity.
But aren't the runways far enough apart that that's not an issue?
For sod props, that's not the point. It's the issue around them being far enough apart is when they are both moving in the same direction to land in the same direction or depart in the same direction. Sod props, we are having aircraft arrive on one runway and depart off the other runway in the opposite direction to each other. And so it is a low-capacity mode. The Brisbane Airport EIS always stated that, and we're a little bit lower than where we would like to be in terms of what we can manage on a per-hourly basis, and we're not running...
A little bit lower. You haven't changed. It hasn't changed. Anyway, we'll come back to this at future hearings, because I don't quite understand. I think the evidence from some of these witnesses is very clear. Your evidence is clear as mud. On the other point, then, the other point here, very quickly,
my two-cent there is that when we're talking about the capacity reference, the opposite direction operations isn't about runway capacity; it's the airspace capacity because we're pointing aeroplanes at each other.
Sure, but
that's where the constraint comes. It's not about runway capacity. That's all.
It's obviously one factor. Why has it taken? What will it take? You're saying this won't be complete till next year. Why has it taken 7 years? You said the CASA changes were back in 2018. It's taken 7 years to... I mean, the runway probably would have been built within 7 years. Why has it taken that long?
Senator, we worked with Brisbane Airport Corporation over the last number of years since runway opening to agree a point at which air services would implement the independent parallel runway operations, and it has been agreed that we will do that next year, and that's driven around a couple of factors, but primarily because it will enable much higher number of aircraft to arrive over Brisbane City in any given hour, and that hasn't been needed for operations today. There's some complexity as it relates to infrastructure at Brisbane Airport, where Brisbane Airport have made clear to us that in fact they don't need the mode this year. Next year they estimate they do need it, and we've committed to delivering it in the back end of next year.
That's amazing.
It's actually
so later on in the evidence, not that later on, but a little later on, Mr Boyle said that they anticipated that under the sod drops mode would be able to do 40 movements per hour, whereas at the moment the maximum they can do is 15, maybe 20 movements per hour. And directly, Mr Boyle, directly quoting him, he says, again, there are some procedural changes that are required to the flight paths and some staffing constraints that have meant that it cannot be yet introduced. So why haven't we got a situation where this sod drops mode can go up to the 40 movements per hour?
Senator, there's some complexity with the sod props mode that we're working through. The EIS forecast that we'd be able to move approximately 40 per hour, and it is correct that we are closer to 20 per hour today, and that's due to some of the airspace design that sits around that. There are flight paths into Sunshine Coast, over Moreton Bay and into Gold Coast that conflict with this, which make it difficult to run during higher demand periods. So we use sod props during night time and lower demand periods. It's also the case that that's when it's arguably, Senator, most valuable. It's a sensitive time of night, sensitive time of day for communities. We've been working toward extending the use of sod props since the runway, parallel runway went live in July 2020. Some statistics to give you a sense of how we're going and where our challenge still remains. In 2023, we ran sod props for 8%, approximately 8% of all operational hours. We assess that weather and traffic mean that we could have potentially run it for between 11 and 13% of the time. So we see opportunity to extend the hours in which we currently deliver sod props, and we need to do that through working with our teams, through making procedural adjustments and also some airspace changes. We've also looked at whether or not to extend the use of sod props we could adjust the criteria around tailwind and explored an increase.
I'm going to come back to that. Let's not get diverted. So when will these flight paths be redesigned?
We plan the flight paths to be redesigned in the course of next year, but we will be increasing sod props through procedural processes later this year in July 2024. We plan to increase sod props from Friday at 10 p.m. To Saturday at 10 a.m. And then again sod props from 10 a.m. Saturday until 4 p.m. Sunday. That will give sod props is, if you will, flight for flight, the best noise outcome for Brisbane communities, which is why we're so focused on it, as are Brisbane Airport, to deliver better outcomes. And for some sense of what we achieve when we do that, for every sod props flight that takes place, we overfly a minimum of 286,000 fewer members of our community at a level of 60 decibels, and 23,000 fewer population are overflown at 70 decibels. So it's clearly a very beneficial mode, and that's what we're working a way to do, removing these procedural and operational restrictions. But we have to do it safely, Senator. We have to make sure that we don't compromise safety.
So, just going back to this issue of the independent runway, it's just occurred to me as we've been talking. I'm struggling to understand here. The promise that was made to people of the Brisbane community was that having a second runway would allow over the bay flights to occur more regularly. But now you're saying that to operate this over the bay mode, the sod drops mode, so-called sod drops mode, we don't need two runways because they don't have to operate independently. How does that make sense? Why couldn't we have just done this before the second runway? Or could we have?
So
people hoodwinked.
I'm afraid there's an incorrect assumption I think you're holding there. When we run a simultaneous opposite direction parallel runway mode, we are using both runways. We are arriving aircraft onto one runway from over the bay and departing on the other runway over the bay. And so we are using both runways, Senator.
Right, but they're not operating independently.
No, Senator, and nor can they for the sod props mode. This was the point I was trying to make before. There is an independent mode, Senator, and that is an independent parallel runway operations. Sod props doesn't operate independently, as Mr Harfield pointed to, because of complexity at the airspace. In the airspace, I beg your pardon.
When was the EIS approved for the second runway?
My recollection was 2007. I think it's
2007.
The EIS was approved around.
And in that EIS, they said we want to get to 40.
Senator, that's
40 movements per hour. You said earlier that was in the EIS.
That's correct,
40
yes.
movements per hour. So we're looking at taking potentially. You said next year you'll finalise this. 19 years.
Senator, we're making
19 years. to make the changes that were approved in 2007.
Senator, we commenced detailed design. We commenced detailed design in about 2016. The runway went live in 2020.
That table up.
There needs to be a class action on this. I mean, I don't want to put the
$3 million
Commonwealth's balance sheet at risk, but that is unbelievable.
Let's get back to questions.
People can't sleep.
Let's get back to questions, Senator Canavan.
Years.
Thank you. Let's get back to questions.
In shorter
If we've got
time.
no other questions, we can release the
Oh,
witness.
we've got plenty of questions.
All right, well, let's get back to questions.
So,
Come on.
as I flagged, we might go to the Tailwinds issue. I noticed that there has been a safety case from 5 for 5 knots to 7 knots has been approved. Is that right?
No, Senator, it was not.
How come then? Isn't there? There was an article in Aviation Australia. Let me pull it up, which claimed that Singapore Airlines, Emirates, and Cathay Pacific were going to operate by flying into Brisbane Airport at 7 knots an hour. Is that
Senator, there is a
Not
trial
right.
that's being undertaken.
trial? Okay, right.
There are two very important separate elements here, Senator, if I may. The first is a safety case relating to the rule set that air traffic controllers must adhere to, which is determined by the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and that is around runway nomination as it relates to, in this case, downwind. The second matter, which is the trial you've just referred to, is whether or not aircraft and pilots and airlines may operate with greater than a 5-knot tailwind. Pilots and airlines have the ability to make a determination to operate at greater than 5 knots tailwind if they choose, and they go through appropriate safety processes. The limitation is that the rule set for air traffic controllers does not allow us to nominate a runway where there would be greater than 5 knots of downwind. Right. So practically, Senator, what that means is at sensitive times of day, airlines such as the ones you've just mentioned can request to operate off a runway that air traffic controllers wouldn't be able to normally nominate because they are participating in this trial with BAC. During those low traffic periods, it's typically the case that we can then accommodate a change in runway direction and manage that, and that gets better outcomes for the community of Brisbane.
Right, okay. So what's the status of this? Sorry, I thought this article, the safety case, had been approved. What's the status of the safety case?
So we're working with. So we submitted a safety case to CASA in the course of last year. CASA said that they weren't satisfied with that. We've been working with BAC, and this trial is a BAC initiative to gather more data so that we can look to provide additional information for CASA to consider whether or not they're prepared to change the air traffic control rule set to allow for a 7-knot downwind at Brisbane.
You might have seen that some of the pilots were scathing of the proposal.
Yeah.
Some of them claim they hadn't been consulted, although that seemed to be disputed later. What's the status there of that? Have
Senator,
pilots been consulted about this proposed change?
Senator, we are consulting. This is very much a change that impacts pilots and airlines, and so we are absolutely engaging in consultation with airlines domestic and international. And I think your comment there goes to the heart of some of the challenge that we have with this issue. In terms of delivering better community outcomes by using a particular runway.
When did you last meet with the pilots?
I'd have to check on the timing of that. We've been speaking.
You said international and domestic airlines. When did you last discuss this with international airlines?
I'll have to take that on notice, Senator. We've
when
been
did you
working.
last discuss this with domestic airlines?
It would be in the last number of weeks, Senator.
Okay, on notice, I would like a full list.
Thank you.
You come in and make flippant remarks that you've heavily consulted with pilots.
Senator.
And we ask the pilots and they say they're not consulted with. So I would like to see the hard data
All right, but before we do that,
tells us the dates and who you met with. Thank you.
To be fair to the witness, I don't think he's coming in here making flippant remarks, and I don't think that's
It's not our first rodeo at this conversation.
Look, I don't think that's appropriate language to be used in this forum. But
rodeos
he's
in
taken.
our AT committee.
I think you should just, be a bit more mindful of the language used. But was there anything else that you needed to add, Mr. Curran?
I was simply making the observation, Senator. I think the evidence that I heard given at the Brisbane public hearing for the noise inquiry, and as mentioned just by Senator Canavan, goes to exactly to the heart of the issue, that the different perspectives on how air services best balance out what are competing interests around where we place flight paths and how we manage airspace. And we seek to strike that right balance. But it is challenging. There are a range of different views.
That's all right, we've got plenty of time.
Okay.
All right, we'll follow up with CASA on the safety case. Just turning now to I think what has been colloquially termed the full runway trial. Does that make sense?
Yes, Senator.
Take-off or landing trial. There's a lot of, you would have seen a lot of criticism of that from a variety of witnesses, that in fact, when that trial was done, the what was referred to as height markers for pilots were not adjusted. So their actual, apparently their ascent and I presume descent pathways didn't change despite potentially using the full runway. So therefore it wasn't surprising there wasn't a significant change in noise. Do you have a response to that issue? Do you understand what I'm putting to you there?
I am familiar with the trial, and we undertook the trial, I think it was 2022. At the time, that trial was requested to be initiated by the then BAPAF group, the Brisbane Airport Advisory Forum. It was considered a genuine option to implement quickly, where we may be able to get some benefit for communities. And in very plain terms, Senator, what we did was not allow aircraft to operate from an intersection and insist that they direct them to use the full runway. Yes. That practically meant that aircraft had about 250 metres more runway that they would take off from. The theory being that they would then take off earlier and be higher across the first communities in Brisbane. In general terms, that's what happened. It wasn't by enough to be perceptible. We had a noise monitor that recorded all of that. And in general terms, it was around a 1 decibel difference. We produced...
Can I just get you to come back to the question? I know all that. That was all discussed. What I asked about were the height markers changed.
The height markers were not changed, Senator. Aircraft are cleared above them.
Yeah, but this is the point that many were making, including the pilots, that meant there was no real difference from... there was never going to be a noise difference because they were still hitting the same point in the sky, despite using the full runway.
Senator, I listened to the evidence of Qantas to Brisbane, and I think they were quite clear around the way that they managed their engines in terms of whether or not they actually took off any earlier or not. The height marker is aircraft are cleared above that height marker. It's the minimum altitude that they need to be at, and so the aircraft were above that height marker. And as we learned through that process,
so they were above it.
Yes, that's right, Senator.
How do you know they were above it?
Because we monitored their altitude and the noise associated with it.
Well, they're claiming they didn't, and the pilots just hit that marker. How many? Okay, go.
Senator, I recall the evidence that was given specifically that is the lowest altitude that you can be at. They are cleared to a higher altitude, and I think 3,300 is the altitude for the marker.
Can you, on notice, get us some data about how many flights, what percentage of flights were above that marker? Particularly, was there a baseline? Did you say, okay, before the trial, this was the flight path of flights, and then after the trial, this was the path? What was the difference?
Senator, we didn't have the noise monitor.
What was the
we didn't have them.
You said you collected it. You say you did.
We did not have the noise.
One at a time.
You do collect this data, but you don't.
Hang on there, Mr. Curran. I mean, seriously, just one at a time.
Senator, we didn't have the noise monitor.
Hang on.
Let's do a research project.
You know, I don't think it's helpful. Everyone's just yelling on top of each other. All right, Senator Canavan.
Well, you said you collected data. Do you have that data?
Senator, yes, we do. We'll provide that on notice. The point I was making is we didn't know ahead of time that we were going to do this trial, and so we didn't have a noise monitor sitting in this particular location.
This is not about a noise monitor, though. This was about assessing whether there'd been, because I think the issue here, at least from your evidence I'm taking away, is there was nothing obliging the airlines to hit a higher ascent. They just could. And so how do we know they did or not? That's the question. To what extent did they?
We can provide you that data on notice.
Okay. Now, just maybe, I think Senator Payne might have asked about this. I was only listening to part of it. Just continuous descent operations. Did she ask about that? Or?
Yes, Senator, she did.
Yeah, right. Okay. I might just go and leave it room. We've got other hearings, so I'll let that one go. And look, finally, what concerned me perhaps most was something totally separate, but Brisbane Airport obviously have a strong growth strategy. The modelling they present to us seemed to indicate, it was a bit vague, but seemed to indicate they're potentially going to increase night flights by 5 times. When I put that to them, they said, yeah, that sounds about right. Later they had to correct that. But they're still growing, even on their corrected figures. They apparently currently do about 50 flights a night over Brisbane. That is projected to grow by 2040 to 87. Do you have any ability to regulate that? I mean, I don't think it'd be great to go to a curfew, but I'm not so sure complete unrestricted nighttime flights are what the Brisbane people thought the airport would do. So what's your ability at the moment to regulate how much of nighttime is used? Putting not a curfew, just can you say, look, that's unreasonable?
Senator, Air Services' role is not to regulate the capacity of airports in any way. Our role there would be to seek to minimise the impact on communities as far as practicable, and the way we would do that is to maximise that mode we were talking at length about before, simultaneous opposite direction parallel runway operations, to the extent that we can ensure, with weather and traffic permitting, we operate over the bay. That is the greatest mode for alleviation of noise for communities in Brisbane.
Although, doesn't you operate under the Air Services Act, right?
Yes, Senator.
Doesn't the Air Services Act say that there needs to be a consideration of the impact on communities of noise or something like that? I'm just trying to find
Senator, yes, that's correct. There is.
So I realise, look, I'm not trying to put you in a difficult position. I think if we're going to do something like this, it probably has to come from government, not from yourselves. But I'm just not sure what you said is quite correct. You're saying you don't have a role in that. The Act itself has an overall objective here to ameliorate the impact on communities, and clearly significant flights at night time will have a big impact on communities. So why can't you look at something like that?
Senator, because when the approvals are put in place, the EIS, the planning process that goes through, is approved by government, relevant ministers, and that sets a forecast, and essentially that's a permission to grow in that particular way. Air Services doesn't have any mechanisms to restrict the growth of airports. We provide services to the aviation industry. And so the way that we give effect to the paragraph you've called out in our Act is through the tools we do have, which is flight path design, when we seek, and the operation of those flight paths, and we seek to minimise the impacts on communities by designing flight paths that overfly as few people as practicable, and where we do have to overfly communities, we look to provide noise sharing and noise respite opportunities.
Okay, but I've just looked it up. So there's Section 9 of your Act, is that right? You'd be more familiar with it than me. Section 9 of the Act apparently says that the protection of communities on the ground is one of your objectives or priorities. Is that right?
Yes, Senator. In performing our function, which is Section 9, our function is not to regulate what the airport decides to bring in. So we have to deal with and minimise the effect of what gets presented to us. That's the difference.
I mean, okay, so what part of the Act would stop you from saying there should be a cap on the number of flights in certain hours? Tell me what exactly part of the Act would stop that happening.
I think it's perhaps not a matter that it would stop us. We have no power to do that.
But you have the power to tell them you can only fly in this way and that way. Why can't you tell them you can only fly this many times?
We're required Air Services functions are for the safety, regularity and efficiency of air navigation, and underneath that sort of very broad heading is a range of rules around the way that we manage access to airspace, and we don't prohibit access to airspace. If a pilot requests a clearance and we can safely do so, we provide a clearance.
But how do you factor Section 9 into
that just seems...
Through flight path design and our operations.
Why is only flight path design the tool and mechanism to meet Section 9? What part of your Act says that it's only through flight path design that you can do that?
In providing our services, and there's a list of services in Section 8, in delivering those, we have to make sure the safety of air navigation is the most important.
Completely understand, absolutely.
And then minimising, as far as practicable, the effects of the environment on the operations on the community. And so in everything we do, we're trying to minimise that. What we're getting into is restricting the number of aircraft that can arrive, or the demand that the airport would like to bring on is getting into like a restraint of trade piece, which is beyond, rather than deal with... No, so we don't decide...
I mean, why don't we just let them fly wherever they want?
On that flight path. So we have...
It's a restraint on trade.
No.
You are earning your keep today.
All right. We do not have the ability to restrict any access to airspace. We have to manage whoever...
Yes, you do. You do it. You restrict access to airport space by saying that this is a flight path. The flight path is a restriction of airspace, right? You can't fly. If they said, look, I don't want that flight path, this one's less costly for me, I'm going to fly that way, you could fine them, right? If they're not on the flight.
Can't find them.
Well, what's the sanction?
The sanction is that there's no sanction from us. What we have to do is manage that traffic with the use of
I don't know much about SAC.
To manage it safely.
You said, hang on, let's go back. You said that you manage the impacts of community by. Well, there is only one at the moment.
There's only one at a time.
You're the second one. If you be quiet, there's only one.
All right, Matt, just please. I mean, as a chair, I'm just trying to manage the flow of traffic here. Okay.
There's only
but
two people
really,
interested in this committee right now.
Well, that's not true, but you need to allow the witness to also answer your question.
Okay.
So,
I'm just trying to get up to speed. I'm just trying to get up to speed on this act because this is. I've been not a resident of Brisbane, but I became.
all is yours.
Well, it's exciting.
I became affected by the impact of people there. It's terrible what some people have had to go through, and clearly, as you've admitted, partly due to the failure of government agencies to get their act in order. So the current act allows you said before, you partly help manage impacts on community by regulating flight paths. I'm just trying to understand if an airline decides, no, we're going to fly some other path, what can you do to make them go to the path you've decided?
So we issue an airways clearance, and we can reasonably require pilots to operate on particular routes. We need a reasonable rationale for requiring a flight to operate on a particular route over another route. Obviously. Right. Our Act also requires us to foster and promote civil aviation, and so there are a number of expectations on air services as it relates to enabling the aviation industry.
Is flight paths mentioned in the Act at all?
Flight paths are perhaps a subservient part of
Can I just get a yes or no answer to that?
Yeah.
That's a pretty simple. Are flight paths mentioned in the Act?
To my recollection, no, but there are a subset of elements that are mentioned in the Act.
But I'm just trying to understand here how, obviously, the Parliament's given you a broad responsibility to, as you say, Mr Harfield, absolutely number one, must be the safe operation of aircraft, primary consideration. And then also, but while in doing so, make sure there's you limit to ameliorate the impact on communities. Can I take it that it's Air Services Australia that's decided that it'll be the flight paths that you regulate, that you set, that will ameliorate the impacts on communities? There's nothing in the Act or the Parliament said do this by flight paths.
Correct, Senator. Right. Where there are other means, we will also.
I'm just look, and it's obviously your decision. And as I say, I think if we're going to go down to something like caps, it'll probably have to be something by government. Government's obviously set curfews, etc., at different airports. But I just don't quite understand why you can't consider that as every other major piece of infrastructure, like ports, meatworks in my town, there are regulations on what they can do at night time for the community. And airports are a pretty big impact on a community. And don't understand why there shouldn't be some sort of regulation. I'm not saying a curfew per se, but something reasonable. All right. I might leave it there.
Thank you.
We've got more to go with this, though.
We do. I just want to understand what you're being paid right now, Mr Curran.
Senator, it's approximately... is an approximate answer acceptable?
Sure.
Approximately, including superannuation, $550,000.
So your interim role, pay packet, when does that start?
I've had no discussions around a change in remuneration.
With the board or the Minister's office?
That's correct.
What is your compensation package, Mr Harfield, having been surprised termination of your or reappointment process?
It's in line with my contractual entitlements.
And was just say I haven't read your contract. What is it?
A notice period, and plus also payout of long service leave and leave entitlements.
Okay, so what is the notice period?
I have to check. I haven't actually checked at this moment in time because it's still in discussion.
Who at the table would be across that? You will be.
Sorry, Senator?
Well, you're going to have to pay it out of the budget.
Senator,
So what's the long service provisions for the CEO? How much long service has he got on the book that you're having to account for in your balance sheet?
I don't have that specific detail with me, Senator.
But you do keep that detail?
We do.
I would like that detail.
Understood, Senator.
And not just in days. I would like it in how much it will cost you to pay out Mr Harfield for his long service. When were you due to take long service, Mr Harfield?
I've recruited over my 35 years, Senator.
So that's quite a significant sum.
I think it's about 11 months.
11 months. Thank you. And given you, and it's on your current, based on your current salary?
Yes, it is, Senator.
So for 12 months, your total remuneration is a little over $1 million. So 11 months, it would be a little under $1 million for the
yes.
long service leave. Yeah, give or take.
Give or take.
So that's a long service, and I'm interested in this notice period, given that, to the way I read things, given the board's recommended you to the Minister for reappointment, the board extended your period from the 8th of March to the 8th of June because Cabinet hadn't got their act together on looking at that appointment, and then for you to be shocked or surprised, I think was your words, surprised on the 17th of April to get the news that you weren't going to be reappointed. Given you were in that 3 months period, what impact does that have on notice? Because ideally, if you're not going to be reappointed, and that was supposed to happen prior to the 8th of March, that should have happened 8 weeks or whatever the...
Yeah, I'm not sure of the detail.
You're really not sure of the detail?
No, it's because it has been focused on handing over, and this is the discussions that are about to happen with the board. Still got another week and a half to go.
Who in the organisation is across your contract?
Senator, if anyone was to be across Mr Harfield's contract, that will be me. I have not yet received instruction from the board on Mr Harfield's exit. I'm not familiar with his contract. I would have to go and look at that. My understanding would be that the exit date will be the 8th of June. So picking up on your question,
I appreciate that,
but any notice would be from that point.
Isn't he
Not from
required
March.
additional compensation if the notice period isn't within a required time frame?
At the termination of contract, there is a notice period from the 8th of June, and I would need to look at what the duration of that is.
If on notice you could provide that. Now, your extension of 3 months, that was approved by the board. Did that also require ministerial sign-off?
I'm unaware, Senator.
Well, surely you're aware of the Act.
Well, under the Act, the board can appoint the Chief Executive Officer or Acting Chief Executive Officer. I do know that there were conversations from the Chair, but I'm not sure who they were with in the sense of with the department or with the Minister and what the authority was.
Okay,
because it was a board resolution to extend me for 3 months.
Yes, no, I know it was a board resolution. I'm just wondering, your recommendation for reappointment had to go to Cabinet by a ministerial recommendation. I'm wondering if your extension between the 3rd of March, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Minister, do you know?
No, I don't, I'm afraid.
Minister King's office, do you know? If you could send Assistant Minister Brown a text, that would be helpful.
Direct your questions to the witnesses at the table.
Oh, well, just knowing there's some friendly, helpful people watching that could save me putting in some questions on notice. Okay.
Plenty of friendly faces here at the table.
There's lots of friendly faces. Okay, I want to now go to Western Sydney Airport flight path issues, keeping on the topic at hand. The 2016 flight paths that were released changed drastically when the 2023 flight paths were released due to the community feedback. Can the department advise on whether there will be much change to the the agency, 23 flight paths as a result of the substantial amount of feedback Western Sydney communities given, and thanks to Melissa McIntosh for leading that process.
The role of air services with the Western Sydney
Mr. Curran,
paths.
I am absolutely confident that we would not still be here at midday. We could keep our answers short and sharp. I'm aware of the process. The community that has asked me to ask these questions is aware of the process. They're the ones that are in the process. So if we could just answer the question, what likelihood is there of substantial changes to the flight paths?
Senator, that's a matter for the department. Air Services has been a support role. The department is lead on this matter.
Have you advised the department of what changes could be made?
Senator, it's a matter for the department as
I know they're the decision maker. Do they rely on your advice?
Senator, yes, I think we've worked very
Yes, and
closely
what
with
advice
them.
have you given the department?
We've worked through the 8,500 bits of feedback right the way through. I think the likelihood is that there is going to be a number of changes, but I can't offer any detail on that. It's a matter for the department.
I know the decision is with the department. My question is, given Air Services Australia has been working with these communities, have you advised the department that there needs to be substantial changes?
No, we've not advised the department of that.
You've advised them of small changes?
We've not advised them that there's any significant need for change based on the EIS.
So are there there's no other flight path options being considered based on your advice?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, you can't speak to whatever other advice the department may have taken into account, but from your perspective, it remains as stand. The draft policy for noise mitigation demonstrates that there is a discrimination between homes within a boundary and homes outside a boundary. Can you advise whether homes that are outside the boundary have the same noise level as those within the boundary, and that therefore will receive some form of noise mitigation? Or you don't know until the department makes their decision? So you haven't... Right, okay. Has there been any change to... Given the changes outlined in 2023 and the change from the 2016, is there a reason why these flight paths are, and I'm looking at them now, are going directly over the Penrith area, and that there hasn't been more creative ways to mitigate the noise impact? It seems to concentrate now.
Senator, I'm not familiar with the specifics of the flight path you're referring to, and again, that the proponent of the airspace design is the department, and that really is a matter for the department. Air Services will take the role of detailed design post the finalisation of the EIS, which we expect to occur around November this year, and then we will do the final design phase. Up until that point, the department is the proponent and will be making decisions.
The department hasn't been on the ground, we know that.
They've done the consultation. We've been there in support of them.
Really? They've been sitting there with the community groups?
We've had some of our team members in support of the department. No, we're definitely in a supporting role.
I know you have. I'm saying Air Services Australia has been on the ground in these communities.
Yes.
The department?
Yes, Senator. We have only been there in a supporting role for the department, with the exception of, I think, about a very small number of locations where we did some additional engagement with community, but the vast majority of this has been led by the department with Air Services.
So how many community consultations have been conducted in Western Sydney?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator. Again, the department's led that, and we've had some of our technical experts there to help answer some of the finer technical issues.
Who in Air Services Australia is overseeing the Western Sydney Airport?
We have a senior responsible owner for that program, and that's the entirety of the Western Sydney international activities for air services. We've got an air traffic control facility to implement.
No, sorry, within the organisation, who's overseeing the responsibility for engaging with the department and the community on the change to the flight paths?
We have a community engagement lead for this topic. It's a person based in Sydney for us who is our community engagement specialist and is.
And have they been into every?
They or a member of their team, along with some of our air traffic control experts, will have come along to try to answer some of the more technical questions that community members have.
But as far as Air Services Australia is concerned, based on the engagement you've had with the community and the technical work you've done, there won't be significant changes unless the department thinks otherwise.
Or there's other inputs to the process that we don't have visibility of. Correct.
Would that be surprising that you wouldn't be aware of it? Yes. If you cross your brief, that would be a yes. So I'm assuming that they will be relying on your technical advice. Just on Brisbane, I think Senator Canavan has covered most of that. I just want to go to Mr Harfield, a document received under FOI to some of your expenses. And I'm going specifically to a dinner. I won't promote the restaurant, but it is titled a farewell dinner. I'm looking at the date. She says the 7th of February 2023. It's in Canberra.
I reckon I don't have it in front of me. Can I see a copy of it? And
Mr Logan, do you have... Who has the FOIs that ASA has complied with at the table? Mr Stoddart, do you have the FOIs?
I do not.
Mr Curran?
No, Senator, I do not.
Mr Logan?
No, Senator.
So does anyone that is paid in excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars at this table have any, at Senate estimates, have a list of the FOIs you have and haven't complied with over the last 12 months? Did you not think you'd get asked any questions about the FOIs that you have or have not complied with?
Senator, I have
a
some information. I don't have a
Excellent.
list, but I can step you through the issue that you're referring to, if that's helpful.
We found it, Mr Curran.
I don't have a list. But
You don't have the list? What have you got
I
there?
have some. We had this is explaining the FOI non-compliance issue that occurred late in 2023.
Oh no, I haven't even started there.
Okay.
Sorry,
I've misunderstood
This is
your question.
actually an FOI, which probably should be on your website, if not on others' website for public consumption. I might come back after lunch with questions on this, Chair, so that I can photocopy it for everyone and we can table the document.
So the intention is still to continue with their services till after lunch? Or up until lunch?
We've got an hour, or a bit over an hour.
Lunch is...
1:15.
Yep,
Okay.
1:15. 10 past 1, 1:15.
So, Mr Curran, do you know how many FOIs have been requested of Air Services Australia?
Senator, over what time frame?
12 months.
Senator, no. The briefing I have related to the FOI issue that occurred late last year and the number of FOIs that there were issues around in that November, December
But do you
period.
know today how many FOIs you're currently dealing with as an organisation?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
With your order of about 20, Senator.
Thank you, Mr Harfield. So one of the ones that's been concluded, I might actually get the Secretariat to photocopy this, but it is about a farewell dinner for 11 people, 4 Canberra staff and obviously people that have flown in Canberra on the 11th of February last year. And I just
need to see the detail.
we'll wait until we see the
detail on that.
documentation.
All right.
Oh, my staff are great. They've done it for me. I table the document. I seek to table it.
Yeah.
That's going to take some time.
What?
Can I just very, very quickly go to an issue around master planning and the Airports Act that came up with the department yesterday while we're waiting? What role does Air Services Australia have in the draft master plan approval process?
Senator, in broad terms,
Yeah.
the master planning process, we will review what's known as the ANEF, the Australian Noise Exposure Forecast,
Right.
for technical endorsement.
Yep.
We can also provide input regarding other matters that we consider may be impactful on aviation operations.
So, did Air Services Australia, were you consulted on the Moorabbin Airport master plan?
We would have received a copy.
And did you what commentary did you provide back on that?
I have to take that on notice, Senator, for the specific advice that we would have provided.
Senator, what I can say is that we did not provide advice on or comment on the preliminary draft master plan. However, we did provide the technical endorsement of the ANEF element of the draft and final master plan.
Okay, but you didn't comment on the preliminary draft plan.
That's correct.
Do you know if CASA did?
No, Senator, I'm not aware of that.
No.
We wouldn't normally be in the normal process.
Okay. We're getting to that. So maybe we can now go to, given we're still waiting for that, there it is. The failure to respond to the Freedom of Information request. So on the 1st of December last year, I submitted an FOI for those quarterly reports to Minister King in accordance to the Statement of Expectations. ASA didn't respond to the request in any way, and following the statutory 30-day period, and the failure to respond was taken as a deemed refusal decision, and in accordance with the FOI Act, an appeal was lodged with the Office of the Australian Information Commission to seek access. On the 15th of March, Miss Elizabeth Grinston wrote to me to apologise for the failure of ASA to acknowledge or respond to the FOI, and I'd like to table that letter. And ASA on that day provided me with a decision on the FOI, which actually provided me with the quarterly report. So my question to Mr Harfield, it's a statutory requirement for public agencies to comply with the obligations of the FOI Act 1982, which include a statutory obligation to appropriately resource, manage, process and respond to any FOI requests. when I submitted that on the 1st of December, you didn't respond. Why?
Senator, we had a systemic breakdown with the transfer of our FOI officer. At that time, it was in about December. As a result of that, it came to light that there was the outstanding request when the advice from the Commissioner came through. As a result of that, I asked for an investigation to be conducted when first been aware, and we conducted a review of our FOI process and systemic failures, and that came out with 7 recommendations which have been implemented. But we actually had a failure which involved 20 FOIs.
Right.
Requests.
Previous to mine.
All around the same time as when yours came in.
Righto. So what was the process prior to my FOI landing for the acceptance and processing, and as I said, the statutory obligations of ASA under the Freedom of Information Act?
So we can provide notice the procedures that we had in place that were there normal. The issue broke down was that our FOI officer resigned and moved on. And
when did your FOI officer resign?
Do you have the date there?
Sorry, I don't have the precise date, but it was in October 2023.
Yep.
And the protocol or the process was handed over. In that handover, there was a failure because there was confusion on who had responsibility. And so the FOI receives weren't being monitored appropriately. There was confusion to whether it was being done internally or with the assistance of a law firm while the transition arrangements were being conducted.
Which law firm?
I have to take that on notice, Senator.
Mr Curran, which law firm?
I'm not certain I know, Senator. I don't want to guess.
Mr Logan, what's the law firm? You're supposed to come with full and accurate information. You are required as public servants to provide this committee with full and accurate information to senators' questions.
And I think they've provided an answer by taking it on notice.
I'm asking Mr Logan who the law firm is that is in charge of their statutory obligations under the Freedom of Information Act.
You've asked
Senator, are you asking?
Senator
well,
McKenzie,
I would like an answer.
You're entitled to ask the questions and they're entitled to answer, and they've said that they've taken it on notice.
Senator,
if Mr
Chair,
Logan has something to add, fine,
Chair,
but the witness have already provided
stop
an answer.
running a protection racket.
Senator McKenzie.
Mr Logan.
Senator McKenzie.
Mr Logan has the answer.
I asked you to withdraw that statement because that's, impugning that the Chair is actually being impartial and actually not being, is being a partisan here. And I just think that's a reflection on the Chair, and you should not do that. I ask you to withdraw, please.
I withdraw
Thank
any
you.
negative reflection on the Chair.
But the witnesses have already provided an answer.
Mr Logan, do you have the answer?
Senator, the firm's not named in the data I have.
But it is in terms of the systems that were in place. Was this law firm someone that the FOI officer that was employed previous to October regularly consulted with?
I'm not, Senator, to my knowledge, I'm not clear on the specifics.
Who is? Who's clear on the specifics?
To a point, because this falls within our General Counsel's area, the FOI officer prior to would have consulted with this firm.
Right. Who's your General Counsel?
Ms Elizabeth Grinston.
Right. Is she here today?
No, she is not.
So there were 20 outstanding FOIs. Were they only received at ASA post-October?
That is my assumption, Senator.
Can I have the number of FOIs dealt with by ASA, Air Services Australia, between January 1, 2023 and October 2023?
Yes, we can, Senator.
How many?
I don't know what the number is. I have to take that on notice.
Are you confident, Mr Harfield, that there was a process in place that fulfilled your statutory obligation?
Yes.
To deal with freedom of information?
Yes.
There just wasn't for the 3 months between October and December.
That is also
Or it would see in
confirmed.
October and March.
No, it was before that, because when it was recognised, action was taken, and as I said, had it independently reviewed, and that review to make sure that everything was in place and the recommendations to improve. And
what was the signal for the recognition that this was an issue? The Commissioner writing as a deemed refusal?
That was part of it, and then advice to me sitting there saying there was a FOI request from yourself, and I said, when did that come in? And then when I saw that it was the 1st of December, put the alarm bells through to that there was something broader than all that.
And so what happened to the other 19?
They have been actioned accordingly, I understand.
As at the 2nd of May, Senator, 18 of the 20 unactioned requests have been resolved, and there are 2 remaining. They're in the process of being determined.
And of the 18, can you tell me how many were released or refused?
Senator, I don't have that information available, but we can provide that.
Okay. What have you put in place to ensure that mixed responsibility doesn't happen again?
That was a result of the review that was conducted. There were 7 different recommendations. It was making sure that it was very understood that the roles, responsibilities, also making sure that the processes that are put into place are robust, that can actually deal with a change in employment.
And have you written and apologised to all other 19?
That is my understanding.
I'd like that confirmed. Was the law firm consulted in answering these 20 FOIs requests?
I have to take that on notice, or whether, because we had conducted the review and put further responsibilities internally, that have been all handled internally through normal processes.
Mr Logan, was this law firm that we don't know the name of yet, but will be getting on notice, paid anything in the budget for the last
Senator,
6 months with respect to freedom of information?
Senator, I'm not sure that level of detail in those transactions. That's within the Office of the General
So I would
Counsel.
like the name of the law firm, and I would like to know how much they are paid to assist Air Services Australia with FOI requests.
Yep.
Did the Commissioner, prior to writing, approach Air Services Australia informally to advise you of the deemed refusal?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Mr Curran?
No, not that I'm aware of as well.
Was it only a letter, or did you seek the Commissioner's additional advice around the systemic issues?
My understanding is that there was advice from the Commissioner that it was of the failure. The interactions after that, I'd have to refer to my General Counsel, in the sense that they were handling it, so I just don't have that detail.
No, that's usual. Was the Minister aware, or her office, about the failure of this agency when it comes to freedom of information?
My understanding is that the Minister's office was advised.
That was advised? When was she advised?
I'd have to take that on notice unless somebody else...
Mr Curran, do you have when she was advised?
I didn't contact the Minister's office.
Relationship with government?
Don't have the specifics.
Don't have the specifics. Okay, that would be wonderful if you could resolve that for me. Now, if we've printed all that stuff off, we have, Taz? Thank you. From the home stretch.
Another 2 hours to go, or for this witness?
I think it's been fascinating evidence thus far.
No, but so are we requiring them to be here after lunch?
Don't know.
Okay. Just to help manage the time with the other witnesses. We'll get to them after Air Services. Yeah. Well, I don't know. You need to ask your colleague. Are we waiting for a document?
With advising the Minister, all 20 have been advised to the Minister.
That we had a failure of the FOI
Yep.
process.
Yeah, a table of documents I was... Yeah, it's an FOI, but I'm...
Oh, is this the one from earlier?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry. I was trying to work out which document. Yeah.
I need the actual originals, though, to ask my questions.
It's all right.
It'll be a bit tricky otherwise. They've got the green on them.
Oh, yeah, then I know what it is. That's right, but it would have been
Okay.
as a result of whatever.
Yeah. All right, so...
I don't think we have the document.
Oh,
Well, just wait.
sorry, I'm waiting. I've handed them in.
We're going to suspend for just a few
Let's
minutes.
suspend.
I've got one question.
You got one?
Yes, I want to go
All
back
right,
to
done that.
in response to Senator Payne earlier. There was the individual that had made 20,000 complaints in 1 year. Is that correct? Did I remember that? Did I recall the number correctly?
Senator, that's right. That was a general answer. The actual number of contacts from the individual concerned was 20,716.
Right. So how much? Exactly 20,000?
716.
716. Now, I have that. That is an average of a complaint every 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Is like that, then that's including night time. That's just the total number of hours in a year. This individual, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say he, but this individual would have had to made a complaint to you every 2 minutes and 20 seconds. It doesn't. I mean, I know there might be some really worked up individuals out there, but I'm just wondering the accuracy of this data. It doesn't seem possible.
Senator, we're aware that they're online complaints, and we're aware that some committee members have been able to create bots that will automatically generate the complaint.
So how do you know
form.
they're from the same person?
We have an identification of the individual.
Using an IP address?
No, Senator, the individual provides their details.
That details.
We know the individual. We've been able to reach out to the individual to see whether there is some more we can do. We've engaged with them. They're based in Perth. We've engaged with them to try to understand whether there is anything we can do beyond airspace flight path changes, because they are, to my recollection, aligned with the runway, and that makes it almost impossible to do much about their circumstances as it relates to changing
So they're not
flight paths.
contacting you every 2 minutes.
These are online forms.
It's a bot, you reckon? They're not
Well,
sending-
we're aware that some have been generated by bots. I wouldn't like to say that's the case for any specific individual. We're just aware that capability has been used.
All right, thank you.
Is that it, Senator Kennedy?
Yeah,
All right.
I think these documents have come around.
All right, now we've
Something
provided the witnesses with the documents. Minister, have you got a copy?
No, I haven't got it.
All right, well, we will wait because I need to make sure everyone has a copy.
With Chair.
You're most welcome. And good to see you again, Carol Brown. Sorry, we should have mentioned earlier that we had a bit of a changeover from Senator Chisholm to Senator Brown.
Thank you, Senator Tacconi.
All right. Senator Mackenzie,
Are we right?
fire away.
So my question is for the dinner on the 7th of the 2nd, which has two visa charges, one for $687 for the 4 locals and just a little over $1,200 for 7 travelling. What was the purpose for that dinner?
That dinner, Senator, was the farewell dinner for Ms Meese's predecessor on thing, as opposed after our monthly managers meeting here in Canberra.
Okay. And so when those 11 people, can you just run through who they were?
They would be
Attendees.
members of the executive team at that particular time. I'd have to go through. Here we go. At that stage, with the
You've
makeup,
missed all the fun, Tony.
it was Mr. Christian Patton, who was the Chief Strategy Execution Officer. Elizabeth Griston, who was the General Counsel and Board Secretary. Where are we? I can bring that up again, sorry. Mr Glenn Lang, who was the acting head of safety at the stage. Obviously myself.
Yep.
Ms Lucinda Gemmell, who was the departing Chief People and Culture Officer. Ms Michelle Bennett, who was the Chief Service Delivery Officer. Mr Thomas Hunter, who was the acting Chief Communications Officer. Mr Mark Scanlon, who was the oncoming head of safety. Because we were in the transfer.
So with the outgoing head of safety and the incoming?
Incoming, at that particular time, because that was sort of a handover meeting that we had during the day. Mr Logan, Mr Curran, and Mr Mark Hind, who is our Chief Technical and Enablement Officer, and I think that's...
Is that up to 11?
Off the top of my head, rattling them off, I think, well, in my quick count, yes, they were.
Okay, excellent. So who were the 4 locals that you...
Myself.
Yep.
Mr Curran, Ms Bennett, as well as Mr Logan.
Okay, thank you. Did the $1,889 dinner include alcohol?
It would have, yes.
Yes? Okay. Is that standard practice?
With a meal like that, there would be alcohol being part of the...
As part of the policy of Air Services Australia?
Policy in reasonableness with the meal.
On notice, can you table the menu and the drinks ordered? So they're all managers? Everyone was...
part of the executive management.
Yep, okay. And so would that constitute a gift to staff, given the... This isn't something you do after every management meeting, is it?
If I've got all the managers' team in town for a particular meeting, then normally we would have a dinner at some stage.
And would you shout everybody, or do they all have their own cards?
No. The most senior person in the room at the time is the one that puts it on their credit card.
Well, when we say shout, it's the taxpayer's shout, isn't it?
Well, it's the organisation's money, which is the people's money.
That's right. So what would be... So for this dinner that I think it roughly adds up to $171 per person, what would be the average wage of people at this dinner? And because not all of them are in the...
No, because of the changeover in the reporting requirements. So we would be talking...
A couple of people on over $500,000.
So we're talking about, let's just say, on average,
$400,000. On average, 11 people earning over $400,000 a year having a free dinner on thanks to the taxpayer. Thank you. I wanted to go to the Pullman Brisbane Airport breakfast, which is yours, Mr Harfield.
Yep, I'm just trying to...
Again?
What was
it's on page 3 of 12. Now, I've stayed at the Pullman at Brisbane Airport, and unless you're ordering Tattinger champagne for breakfast, I find it very hard to understand how your brekkie could cost you $84.
Because I was paying for 2 people, Senator.
Righto. Another member of your management team?
Yeah, because it was in the Pullman for a leadership conference where we bring all our leaders together on a quarterly basis, and we were holding it, excuse me, at the Brisbane Airport Conference Centre, which has got the Pullman next to it, and I would have gone down to breakfast, and one of our leaders would have been joining me for breakfast, and I would have put it on my room.
And who did you have brekkie with that day?
I cannot recall.
You can't recall. On notice, I'd like you to recall. I also wanted to understand the crew bar and cellar.
Yep.
There's
it's in Brisbane.
$613 meal expense for yourself.
Yes, that was. This is with 10 other executive members. This is the one on the 24th of January this year?
No,
Sorry,
we'll get to that one.
No.
This one's on the 15th of the 5th, 2023.
That was, we were in Brisbane for a board meeting, and so had dinner with 2 board members as well as 5 executives who are arriving into Brisbane.
Yeah, okay. So why are you very careful with the farewell dinner to say local 4 packs, travelling 7 packs, whereas this, it's just a meal expense for yourself? You haven't articulated in that it's just dinner for you. You haven't actually said you're shouting.
Yeah, I'd have to have a recall because there are removals, the section 22, and it may have had names that are removed rather than being put in saying for 11 people and then listed the names.
Yeah. Doesn't make sense with the way you've accounted for it. In other places, in other areas, you've accounted it. If you're paying for others, your credit card on behalf of taxpayers is paying for others, you've noted that, whereas here you haven't. I'd like to understand the discrepancy.
Yeah, I have to the discrepancy would have been how it has been entered into the thing, which I don't do the entering.
But Mr. Logan, your team does the entering?
I know, my team doesn't.
Whose team does the entering?
Yeah, my executive assistants would
Your
do the entering.
executive assistants?
Yes, and I had a change in executive assistants pre and post, so it just could be the way that it's just been put in.
So I would like to understand who, other than yourself, was at dinner on the 15th of the 5th last year?
Yes.
Do you know who that...
Not off the top of my head. I know one of the board members off the top of my head.
Yep.
That was Mr David Marchant at the time.
Yep.
And I'm just trying to recall, I think, Mr Logan, you may have been there, but I can take it on notice to work through
Sorry?
it.
I think I was there, Senator.
You think you were there, so was there anyone else? Party for 3 or party for 4?
I know there was at least about 6 people there.
6.
So.
All right.
Yeah, sorry, but Mr Curran has reminded me that Mr Curran was there and Ms Bennett was there.
Yes, don't all... I love that no one's offering until they're dragged to say, I was there. Well done, Mr Harfield. Your name's on it, so you were there from the very beginning. If on notice, you could fill that in for me. Now, on the 31st of January, there was a dinner for 10 people for a little over $1,200. Who were the 10 people?
If we got the list there, because I can bring it up, because we were, as an executive team in Brisbane, doing staff engagement as well as our executive meeting, but also working on what we call the PFAS strategy. And I've got the names here, so I can go through. Obviously myself, Miss Danielle Misa next to me, Mr Curran, Mr Logan, Ms Bennett, Mr Scanlon, Mr Hind, Ms Vivian King, who's our Chief Operating Officer, Mr Christian Patton and Elizabeth Grinston, all the executive team.
There is an inconsistency in your reporting, because on page 2, lunch 2 packs for Harfield and blocked out while travelling to Sydney. But then it's blocked it out in one area, but then it confesses that it's you, Mr Curran, who's having lunch with Mr Harfield. Might need to go through some similar training with your S22s in the FOI process so that it's consistent. If you're not wanting anyone to know, make sure it's blocked out in all of it. Because there is quite an inconsistency as you go through this. Anyway, I will wait. What I would like in the highlighted aspects of this FOI, I would like to understand if alcohol was part of the cost. if it was and I would like to see the total bill. Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
Is that it? Senator Rennick, you have the call.
We've got some executive salary remuneration here. Mr Curran, I think you said you're on $500,000. Why do you need to claim your expenses for going out to a dinner in a foreign country? Like, surely when you're paid that much money, you should be able to pay your own way for extracurricular activities, shouldn't you? I mean, it's taken the mickey out of the taxpayer when you paid such a large amount of money to then turn around and be claiming, there's hundreds, I've got the expense account here showing thousands of dollars being spent on meals. I mean, it's a bit rich, don't you think? I mean, there's one here for QT Canberra, executive workshop dinner for ASA executive at Capital Bar and Grill, $893. Can't you guys pay your own way? I mean, I'm looking at the salaries here for people: $870,000, $500,000, $443,000, $470,000, $448,000, $401,000, $397,000, $333,000. I'll note that's the Chief People and Culture Officer, so that's a lazy $333,000 for culture. Can't you pay for your own meals?
Senator, part of the organisation process is that travelling and having forums like that is that we're able to be reimbursed for reasonable expenses as part of the running of the organisation. So, for example, when we're overseas, is that some of those things is that I'm there with other members of staff, and then we're going out, and I pay for on behalf of the organisation, and so they don't get travelling allowance when that occurs.
So why are you going overseas? I mean, given that you're an expert, presumably because of the amount that you paid, why are you going overseas? Because this is just, I'm just looking at the meal claims here. I'd hate to think how much the flights and accommodation were.
So that trip there to Frankfurt and Leipzig was looking at our new digital aerodrome service that we're putting into Western Sydney and we're establishing in Canberra, because that's where the operations are occurring with Frequentis, who is the supplier. The mention there for the accommodation in Paris was I was visiting Thales, who is the major supplier of our new air traffic control system. That was the reason for the travel.
So are they software providers, are they?
Correct, and hardware providers.
So why can't they, if they're trying to sell you the software, incur the cost for them to fly here rather than you fly over there? Why don't they fly here at their expense, not the taxpayer expense? Because I assume you're going to end up signing a deal to spend more taxpayers' dollars with these guys.
These are already in contract. They're already in contract, and as a part of our site acceptance testing, and that's where some of the things are provided from. Also, in that particular trip, I was already in Europe on holiday, where I had paid for the airfare and all that, and I was coming off the back end of holidays to make sure that I visited, because we had teams in Paris as well as in Leipzig, and I went and joined them on the way through. But I was already at the airfare was completely at my expense. The organisation.
But what about the other staff? They got paid to fly over there, did they?
Yeah, these are our air traffic control, our subject matter experts, and all that sort of stuff in accepting the technology to bring back here as part of the contract.
I would have thought a part of the contract was they incur the costs of providing the contract, but it looks like we're paying over and above for an overseas holidays. That's what it looks like to me.
That is not the case, and there are, for probity reasons, there's the contractual arrangements to be bring in, but we also, for certification purposes, need to send our own team to check and think, and you don't want the supplier paying for the people that are checking their work.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Rannick. Now, do we have any other questions for Air Services Australia? On notice?
And
okay.
To have a spillover day, we'll
do that another time.
Australia.
Thank you very much. We'll now be releasing Air Services Australia.